What is up? Today I wanted to do something a little bit more fun than my previous video. First things first, I want to say thank you to everyone who commented, liked, subscribed on the video. It really boosted the video in the algorithm. I got a lot of feedback and was able to communicate with a bunch of people with varying ideas. So again, thank you to everyone who engaged with that, and please engage with this one for the same reasons, because I like talking with you and expressing ideas. Today, I want to do an abortion argument tier list. Yeah, I know. This one's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a little spicy. So I've set up a bunch of arguments I've heard. Basically, most of the arguments that I've heard, in addition to some that are much better than others, and some that are really quite bad. And we're going to break down what they are and why they fail. So I'm just gonna jump into it. And I've got them all set up down here. If there are any that you know of that you don't see here, any arguments that you think I missed, feel free to let me know, and I can amend it or add something in the comments later. I'm actually going to skip the first one here because I actually think this is one of the better arguments and probably one of the more difficult ones to deal with. So I'm going to start with stagnant cells. Stagnant cells is a hypothetical that was brought up by left-wing streamer Destiny in a Trent Horn debate. And basically he posits, well, he doesn't posit. He asks Trent if a child in the womb is expanding up to the point of, he uses the example of 64 cells, and then some anomaly happens and that being stops growing, are we responsible for maintaining that being, the fetus? This, to me, I'm gonna place it before I explain it and why it fails. I think this is a completely middle of the road argument. I think you can trip people up, and I think you can trick people with this. Now, the reason I say it's a trick question is when something stops replicating cells, especially in the case of during gestation. Once it stops replicating cells, it would be considered dead. It would be, for all intents and purposes, considered dead. So the hypothetical doesn't really mesh on to this thing being alive and having some kind of anomaly. There is really no anomaly that fits that criteria. So Destiny tries to pose it as a, well, what would you do if the thing that we call life stops being what we call life, which fails? If it stopped growing, it would stop being alive, and then it would stop having the same moral value as a growing fetus. This is why I pose this one as kind of a trick question. It's really only going to catch you up if you aren't prepared for something like it, which you shouldn't be prepared for a hypothetical like this, because a hypothetical like this sucks. But that's just one of the most famous left-wing streamers. That's his own thing. All right. So, I'm going to go to one of my favorite ones, and this might go into the so bad it's exhausting category. Clump of cells. Now, the clump of cells argument, I don't know how it survived this long. This argument is, well, it's the fetus inside the person, the growing fetus inside of a human is just a clump of cells. So therefore, it doesn't have value yet. It doesn't have any inherent value. There is nothing special about that being. Now, why this fails so hilariously is I'm a clump of cells. You're a clump of cells. This microphone, well, I guess this microphone would be a clump of matter. But the point being is every living being. So sorry, I used the microphone. The microphone's not a good representation. Every living being would be comprised of clumps of cells. This has no statement of value here. There's no addressing the issue. It doesn't really address a moral problem, doesn't address a legal problem. This falls into the so bad as exhausting category because the people who use this as an argument are usually, no offense, they're usually so dumb that they don't understand why this doesn't work. It's like ethics 101, but prior to that. It's like ethics 0. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, moving on. The violinist. I'm going to skip this one too. This one's going last. The violinist. So, the violinist is going to be an A-tier argument. The reason why the violinist is an A-tier argument is that if you are not prepared for it, you can fumble. Same thing with the stagnant cells. And actually, a lot of the ones that I place high are because you can stumble on them. Not because they're strong arguments. It's mostly because you can be tricked by them. So the violinist argument goes, this is a hypothetical. I forget who the woman is who posited this first. But the argument goes, or not the argument, the hypothetical goes, you wake up and you are attached at the hip to a world-famous violinist, the best violinist in the entire world. And you are the only one with the blood type that can keep this person alive. So, doctor kidnaps you, basically takes you hostage, and sews you up to this violinist. Now, the doctor says, this is only going to last 9 months, same term as a pregnancy, and if you detach from him, he will die. So it's this hypothetical is posed at pro-lifers to basically say, well, here's a situation in which you would be saving this person's life by being attached to them for 9 months. If you choose to separate, then you would be not valuing his life because he would die. So therefore, you would do the same thing with this violinist in the case that you would do with a pregnancy. So you wouldn't abort a pregnancy, So you would abort a pregnancy because you would detach from the violinist. Now, again, this one stumbles people because it's trickery. It's not. I'll explain. It doesn't apply as a 1-to-1. So the hypothetical fails because, one, you are being forced to do this by against your will. Now, this is why I wanted to come back to this next argument. I guess we'll do that next. So that's the first symmetry breaker. The second symmetry breaker is you are not related to this person. You being related to a person has a lot to do, especially in a parental way. You actually have specific duties that you're supposed to do when you're a parent. For example, you can't let your child starve. But you don't have to go and feed homeless people. You're not going to be charged with anything for not feeding a homeless person, but you are going to be charged if you don't feed your child. We have specific laws that pertain to parental and child relationships. Now, in addition to that, there's another problem with that. There's a moral distinction to be made too, which is you aren't responsible for that person the same way you are a child. So even in the legal context, there's actually a moral argument too. Now, another argument is you're sharing blood, which would be considered an organ. The uterus actually doesn't match that description of something that would be shareable. So the uterus is actually for a child. It's actually for the housing of a child while the mother is pregnant, while they're gestating. So the womb as an organ is specifically designed for that purpose. This is another symmetry breaker with the hypothetical where sharing blood in the example is not the same thing. The womb is for the child. The blood is not for that person. So there's a bunch of symmetry breakers. So this argument, I'm putting it in A because it works, but it only works if you're not ready for it. It's kind of a theme here. So then let's do this one next because I actually pointed out a symmetry breaker here. Rape or incest. This one's also going to go in A. The reason why this is going to go in A is because this is the highest emotional appeal you can make in this argument. It's the highest version of the emotional appeal you can make in this argument. And a lot of pro-lifers agree that in cases like this, you should not abort a child. So when someone who's pro-choice asks, "Hey, what about the cases of rape or incest?" The end principle argument from the pro-life side is you don't punish the child for the sins of the father. Basically, two wrongs don't make a right, or two evils don't resolve each other. There's no crime that exists where because the father committed it, you kill the child. There's a lot of variation to that, but to remain principled in this position, you would have to agree that even in these cases, you shouldn't kill a child. The correct argument, the correct response argument to this would be, if it really is that much of a burden, you can adopt. You can have them be adopted. But again, this is one of the stronger arguments because it is the emotional appeal. It is the highest version of the emotional appeal, basically. So you're forcing the pro-lifer to admit a position on principle that you think makes them look bad. Is basically why this is a good argument. It's one of the only reasons I would place it this high as an argument. And the incest thing, same thing. Same scenario. Editing Brian here, I forgot to add one thing about this argument. I don't know why I forgot it in the video. I guess I just was trying to get to the next section. Another thing you could bring up to counter this argument is you can ask, in the case of rape or incest, would you be for banning all other abortions if we kept those as things that you could abort for? If the answer to that is no, they would keep all the other recreational versions of abortion available, then you can just follow up by asking, well, then why do you care about this argument? Because you're showing that, okay, they don't really care about this argument. They're just trying to pose it to basically try to get one over on you. I'll leave it there. Back to the video. Viability, I'm going to put this, I think, in B as well. The reason I'm putting viability in B, maybe even C, I think viability is actually much easier to handle than the other ones. The reason I would put viability in C is viability as an argument only works if you don't use any other parameters for what viability means, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So, when somebody argues that the viability of a child is what gives that child value, then they would have to also argue that babies that are 1, 2, 3 years old who can't fend for themselves, who aren't viable, would also fall into that category. So this using this as an argument, saying, well, the baby couldn't survive outside the womb at 20 weeks, at 26 weeks, at 30 weeks. The baby couldn't survive. Well, actually, the baby can't survive at all without parents, without somebody who cares, or some kind of guardian over the child. So viability fails because if they go off of just this as a core principle, then you would be able to kill 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. You'd basically be able to do whatever you want. So yeah, I'm dropping it down to C instead of B because this argument basically leaves murder on the table. I don't think that's really great. Okay, here's another good one. Health of mother. Where am I placing health of mother? I think this is another one that I would place high, just because if you don't know the data behind it, you can be caught out with this argument. I'm going to place this one high as well. The reason I'm placing this one high is people will say, I'll present the argument. So people will say, well, if the health of the mother is in danger, then you should be able to abort the child. There's an issue with this argument, but I'll explain why a lot of pro-life people agree with this position. The problem with this position is there's very, 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 very rarely, I don't even know if there are even like whole percentages worth of cases where the health of the mother is actually at risk in delivery of the child. Now, granting that, saying, okay, it's fine, it's just a minor outlier, let's deal with the minor outlier. If it was 1% or even 0.5% or even 0.5%, it would be very difficult to actually gauge whether or not going through with the labor would actually harm the mother. I don't exactly know what metric you would possibly use to say, well, if we deliver, you are going to experience X. And neither do the people making this argument. So the problem with this argument is, if you don't know what the potential health risks are, and I don't know what the potential health risks are, then why are we even making this argument? Is basically the point. Why even start with this argument if you don't know the health risks and I don't know the health risks? I know that it makes up a completely minute percentage, almost to the point where it's non-existent. So let's say there are cases where it is happening, there is a risk. You should still opt to save the child as well, as long as the mother isn't going to die from it. So basically what I mean is, if there is a problem, you should be searching for a solution that keeps both alive. Now, let's grant everything about this argument. Let's grant the entire thing. Let's say there are cases where the mother will die because of the child. In that case, you would have an argument for the abortion, but it would only be it would basically be a self-defense argument. It would be the mother is not in control of what's happening, and the baby is about to cause imminent danger. You would make the same argument for self-defense. This is the only time. Actually, I'm going to move it up for that reason. I'm going to make the first S tier, because this is the only time that you would argue that the abortion could or should happen, and it's not because abortion is good, it's because of self-defense. Granting that would be still granting that it basically never happens. And in the cases where it does happen, you should search for a remedy which saves both parties. So I'm actually going to put that as the first good argument, even though it's based off of a whole bunch of outliers. So let's keep that there. Yes, abortion is a human right. This is either the lowest argument or right below the lowest argument. I think it's going to go right here in D. The reason why is human rights are subjective. There's nothing else to it. You claiming it's a human right is just you saying, I will use the state to enforce this right that I believe I have, this preference that I have towards thing. The perfect counter argument to that is, no, it's not. It's not a human right, and I will use the power of the state to enforce that it's not a human right. This doesn't show any moral righteousness. This isn't really even a legal argument. It's just I would vote. I am voting in preference of doing thing. So I would put it almost at the bottom. Yeah, that's a fine place for it. Because again, you can, the way that rights shake out and the way that conversations about rights shake out is either you have some kind of standard for what rights are, and you say, here are the things that I'm going to do to make sure that we ensure those rights. Even if you had a moral justification, a legal justification, even if you created the justification for these things, you would still be appealing to the government to enforce the right. You would still be basically voting. You would still basically be voting to just assert that you have that right, and then the opposite group could assert that you don't. Is basically the bottom line of that argument. I'm trying to think of how they would even word that better to make themselves have a better case for that. Well, that actually comes up in a different argument. The case for that comes up in a different argument, so I'll wait. Personhood. This is another good one. And by good I mean can trick you. Actually, I need to move this back down. I need to move health of the mother back down because there's actually a better argument than that. But I'll get there. So personhood. Personhood tries to blend a philosophical argument with a biological argument, and I think that's actually why this fails, and I'll explain why I think that's why this fails. So the personhood argument is this human is not an individual person yet, and then they try to blend the philosophical argument of personhood, which is basically experiences, consciousness, and a whole bunch of other things. Basically, it's experiences. An individual needs to have experiences. And they say, well, because this person hasn't had experiences yet, therefore they're not a person, therefore they don't have rights yet. Now, this fails for a couple of reasons. The first reason is we determine when rights are given. God doesn't determine when rights are given. We determine when rights are given. So if I just say, no, your criteria for when rights are given is wrong or immoral, there's really no argument they can make against it. A better argument, not reducing it down to rights, would be actually individualism as a philosophical concept doesn't come in because we're talking about things in a biological nature. So I'm going to subvert that conversation by saying person is actually an individual who has separate DNA. That's the thing that makes a person, not the philosophical concept of personhood. There might even be a better argument than that, because I think that won't really compel certain people. A better argument than that is it a human or is it a person? So if you're going to, and I'll explain the distinction, if you're going to argue that this personhood revolves around experiences, I can come back and say, well, I'm actually not interested in whether it's a person or not, because I don't give rights to people based off whether they're people. I give rights to them based off whether they're human or not. So I think that's a better distinction to make because it's a more encompassing category, and it makes more sense to provide human rights to humans and not person rights to persons. So I think a better argument is to shift from personhood back to biology and say, well, you're using this philosophical term to describe it. I can just use biology to describe it. And my standard seems to be a better standard because I can actually define the thing that gets given rights. Actually, for that reason, no, it's going to stay. I think it's a complex argument, but I wouldn't rate it higher because it's a complex argument. I would rate it fairly low as something that would be compelling or would convince somebody. You can't, so shut up. This is a good argument, and I'm going to put it in so bad it's exhausting. So the you can't, so shut up argument is my way of phrasing you can't, as a man, you can't have an abortion, so you can't have an opinion on abortion. This goes into so bad it's exhausting because obviously there are a bunch of things I can have an opinion about that I didn't do. I didn't murder somebody, but I can have an opinion on murder, which is ironic for the topic we're talking about. I'm not an astronaut, but I can have an opinion on astronauts. Everything is encompassed in this. I'm not a dog, but I can have opinions on dogs. I'm not a toaster, but I can have opinions on toasters. This argument, I put it in this category because this is kind of like your college campus liberal blue hair woman has no idea what she's arguing. It's just basically it's a talking point. It's just I don't really want to contend with this, and I really don't want to think that hard. So you can't do it. So shut up. That's why it's going in the lowest, definitely the lowest one. Okay, bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is going right next to personhood because. Actually, no, because the one I was thinking of was human rights. Bodily autonomy is going right next to human rights. And the reason is because they're related to me and they're both very poor arguments. Basically, what the bodily autonomy argument is, well, I have a right to do what I want with my body. You can't go and legislate what I can do with me. I'm an individual. I have these freedoms. Now, this fails for a similar reason as the you can't so shut up argument. There are hundreds of things that we regulate. You can't murder somebody. You can't steal from people. You can't drive 90 miles an hour. You can't, I don't know, you can't assault people. Name your crime. There's a whole bunch of things that exist today that we regulate on a day-to-day basis. Like, hundreds of thousands. There's entire books of laws of things we're not allowed to do. So bodily autonomy instantly fails because there's a whole bunch of things. The premise of it fails right away. So everything following from it fails because yes, the government tells you all the time what you can't do with your body. You can't inject drugs into your body. It tells you I would almost put this in so bad it's exhausting. And you know what? I will keep it there because actually human rights has a little bit more of like you could have a philosophical argument about it. So I'm going to put this in so bad it's exhausting. Because, yeah, there's hundreds of things we regulate everyone can and can't do. Moving on. Consciousness. This one's going right up next to personhood. Now, this is another good argument, but it's only a good argument because, and you're sensing a theme here, you can trick people with this argument. The reason that consciousness works is you can get people to stumble on this. Now, the basics of this argument are The basic argument is consciousness is actually the beginning of life. So once the baby hits that brain development, the organ development where they can understand or perceive things around them, that's when babies are alive. Now this fails for a couple reasons. First, we don't know exactly when consciousness begins. This isn't the best argument, but it's one of the counter arguments to this. We don't know when consciousness begins, so why are we taking guesses on when it's okay to kill something? Basically, if you say, well, it's consciousness, and I say, well, brain development starts at 15 weeks, 16 weeks, 17 weeks, or the perception starts at that time, well, then now you have an arbitrary standard for exactly when consciousness begins. You can subvert that argument by going, okay, well then, prior to that, we won't allow it because then they could be conscious. And then it kind of brings up an arbitrarity to it. A better argument than this is consciousness wouldn't be the measurement you're using because we kill other things that are conscious without similar ramifications. And let me explain this a little deeper. So we understand that humans have rights, but we don't assign the same rights to cows. This exists because rights are arbitrary and they're what we can enforce. If we're going off that standard and we're saying humans have this particular thing about their consciousness that makes them valuable, well then you're really not valuing consciousness because these other things can have consciousness. You're valuing the human aspect of it. So the only real aspect that holds the value would be that it's a human. So how you can pose this argument would be, a cow has consciousness, but we generally agree in society that you can kill cows. A human has consciousness, but we generally agree in society you can't kill humans. So both of these things carry the category of consciousness, but only one of them holds the protected category of human. So the consciousness argument relies on human as the criteria that brings value and not the criteria of consciousness, because we don't assign that to cow, we only assign it to human. So human is doing all the heavy lifting in this argument, not consciousness. That's the best argument against this, and then you would revert to the simple pro-life argument of, well, life begins at conception. We agree that humans are the valuable criteria, so therefore the human aspect is fulfilled at conception. That's why consciousness fails. But again, like personhood and like stagnant cells, these are all things that can trip you up if you're not prepared to counter argue them. All right, socioeconomic. This is going to be another one that's going in D tier. This is a horrible argument. This argument goes, if you can't afford to have a child, then therefore you can get an abortion. This makes basically morals completely relative and useless because it's basically saying, well, the value of a child is based on how much money I have at the time, which is obviously not true in no scenarios because we can't go around killing poor children because they're going to be poor, and rich children don't have more value because they're rich. This one, very simple. I'm just going to grade it here and I'm going to leave it because people who argue this are basically just arguing, I just want to be selfish. I really can't help but be selfish. The IVF ultimatum. Now, this is an old hypothetical that I used to deal with a lot, and it stumped me when I was a younger liberal. But now that I've learned things, this argument, actually, I'm going to drop it down because it's not as good as these arguments now that I've learned things. The IVF ultimatum goes, you could also call this the fertility clinic hypothetical because it's kind of the same thing, but it's an ultimatum about IVF. So you have a building, and the building is full. Well, there's one room that's full with 1,000 embryos that have been fertilized, and there's one room with a child, a 7-year-old child, or 8 or 9, whatever. The building catches fire. It's burning down. If those 1,000 fertilized embryos have the same have human value, which would be the argument in contention, then you should go and save them instead of the 7-year-old child. And sometimes people put into the hypothetical that if the 7-year-old's your own 7-year-old, but I'll explain why it doesn't matter either way. So for me, this was a tough argument to grapple with because on its face, it makes sense. If human life has equal value, then the 1,000 fertilized eggs would be more valuable than the one child. The reason that I choose the child in this example is my own bias, and that's the defeater for the argument. So the defeater for the argument is humans are flawed. And in a quick thinking hypothetical like this, we know this hypothetical really, it's logically possible, but it's not really going to happen. In this logically possible hypothetical, I would still go to choose the child, but choose to save the child, but that's not because I believe the child has more value than the 1,000 embryos. It's because I am flawed with being able to be emotionally manipulated. It's a problem with the hypothetical in general, because I can be manipulated to not understand the value difference and to value the life that I can see, that I can perceive in front of me as more. It wouldn't make that life more valuable, but I can be tricked and basically have my emotions rule that example and say, well, I would go save the kid and leave the 1,000 because, well, I don't want that kid to experience the pain or the harm or whatever. That wouldn't be an argument for the value of both selections. It would be an argument for my fallibility. It would be an argument that would show that I am susceptible to emotional appeal as well. So that argument, actually, I'm going to move it up for that reason, because it's a good argument to test, or sorry, it's a good hypothetical to test people on the value decisions. But what it ends up doing is it actually doesn't end up testing the value decision. It ends up testing the fallibility of the person involved in the situation. So somebody could go for the child, and that would be a value misalignment. But because people are fallible, they can make that mistake, and that can be an emotionally driven mistake. So yeah, I'm gonna move it up even higher. I think it's even better than these three, because then the person can say, oh, well, why didn't you go save the 1,000? And it's like, well, because I'm flawed. I'm a flawed individual. That's why I didn't do it. And now we are going to move this one down because we have the best argument. So health of the mother is going to move down here to A tier. We have the best argument so far, which is bro choice. So the bro choice argument is, excuse me, while I sip my coffee. The bro choice argument is, well, women should be able to get abortion because I want to sleep with them and knock them up without any repercussions. This is a 10 out of 10. There's no counter argument here. This is 100% correct, morally, legally. We got to bring back Roe v. Wade literally just for this argument here, because it's true. Shout out to Freedom Toons. This argument is better than every other argument because it cuts right to the point, which is the access to abortion benefits men more than it benefits women. Women used to be able, or used to have to select harder. They used to have to select for partners with much more intensity. They used to be able to filter partners, do all these things because, well, they used sex as a barrier. Sex was a gate. We lost that due to the sexual revolution, due to these technological changes, due to birth control, due to all these things, due to contraceptives. So this is actually, all joking aside, this is actually a good argument that abortion actually just favors men. Because then you can go sleep around, you can do whatever you want, you can screw around in your 20s, sleep with whoever you want, and you always in the back of your head had the, well, if I knock her up, she can get an abortion. So although this is more of a joke, it's actually maps on pretty well because men are the ultimate benefactors of abortion because we're allowed to sleep around, we're allowed to do whatever we want, and we always have the appeal to just go kill it. I love this argument because obviously it's a joke, but it shows an actual real aspect of this that can be measured, which is abortion is for men at the end of the day. It's not for women. It's much worse for women because now you don't gatekeep, now you don't sexually select as intensively. Like it's that's a whole nother topic, I suppose. Is that all of them? I think that's it. Let me think off the top of my head real quick whether or not, if this is the right positioning for all of this. I think this would go ahead of everything else. So health of the mother would be the top argument, I believe. I think this would be here. And maybe that there. Everything else looks good. This video was a to get an understanding of all the arguments and the best ways to defeat them. Now, it's always going to come down to the best pro-life argument is that exists is humans have value. Human life starts at conception. Therefore, the value that we give to life starts at conception. This is always going to be the best argument because it's irrefutable. The premises all follow. The premises are all valid, and the conclusion follows. So at the end of the day, all of these are going to fail to that. But these are the best arguments that you can make. At least this is the grading of the best arguments you can make on the abortion side. You're still going to lose. You're still, at the end of the day, you're still going to lose this argument. But these are the ones that can trick people. A and B are arguments that can trick people. C is an argument. You're not really going to trick anybody anymore. Like you might have tricked people 5 years ago with these. And then these are kind of just garbage. These are all poo-poo garbage. Anyone who says any of these are basically just selfish people. At least these people up here are thinking. And yeah, again, I appreciate everyone who was interacting in the last video. So if you could like, subscribe, comment, it really boosted it in the algorithm. And I like engaging with you guys. If there's an argument I missed, feel free to add it. Feel free to argue with me in the comments if I missed an argument, or feel free to argue with me on any of the premises I presented. If I misrepresented anything, or if I got something wrong, feel free to call me out. And yeah, that's it. Peace.